The temperature in Fargo, North Dakota, at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday morning is not a number. It's an insult. It's the kind of cold that doesn't just chill your skin, it aggressively attacks your dental work. I was standing on my driveway, wrapped in 3 layers of flannel, a heavy-duty parka, and a face mask that made me look like an unhinged bank robber, rhythmically scraping a heavy steel-bladed snow shovel against the solid sheet of ice coating my concrete. Scritch, clang, screech. It was a beautiful, awful, necessary symphony. If I didn't clear the ice before the morning commute, my truck would slide sideways into the mailbox, and honestly, I just didn't have the emotional bandwidth for that. So there I was, pouring my soul into the manual labor. My breath billowing out like a steam train. When the front door of the house next door flew open with such violent force, I thought the hinges were going to snap. Out stepped Brenda. She didn't just walk. She marched, her fluffy pink bathrobe billowing behind her, like the cape of a very sad, very angry villain. She was wearing these ridiculous fuzzy boots that were immediately ruined by the 3 inches of fresh powder on her walkway, but she didn't care. Her eyes were locked onto me, wide with a kind of manic fury that you usually only see in documentaries about cult leaders. She didn't even wait to get to the edge of her yard before she started screeching. "Hey, stop! Stop that right now!" she yelled, her voice cutting through the crisp morning air like a rusty saw blade. "Are you literally insane? Do you have any idea what time it is?" I stopped mid-stroke, leaning heavily on the handle of my shovel. I slowly pulled down my face mask, letting a cloud of hot breath escape into the freezing air. "Morning, Brenda. It's exactly 6:04 a.m. And if I don't get this ice up, nobody's leaving the cul-de-sac today." "I don't care about your truck, and I don't care about the ice," she snapped, stomping her fuzzy-booted foot onto the very edge of my property line, right where the concrete met the snowbank. That scraping sound is vibrating through my bedroom walls. It is an absolute violation of decency, and more importantly, it is a direct violation of the law. You are disturbing the peace, and I will not tolerate it for another second. I wiped a rogue icicle from my nose with the back of my glove and sighed. "Brenda, it's a snow shovel. It's North Dakota, in January. People shovel snow. It's kind of a regional tradition." "Not before 7 a.m. they don't!" she shrieked, her face turning a vibrant shade of magenta that matched her bathrobe perfectly. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a laminated piece of paper. Because of course she carried laminated documents in her bathrobe, and waved it in my face. "Fargo Municipal Code, Chapter 11, Section 3. Clear as day. The creation of any loud, unnecessary, or unusual noise which annoys, disturbs, injures, or endangers the comfort, repose, health, peace, or safety of others is prohibited. Specifically, intermittent percussive sounds and scraping activities before the hours of 7 a.m. I stared at the laminated sheet. "You actually laminated the city noise ordinance?" "I am the vice president of the Homeowners Association, Kevin. It is my duty to uphold the standards of this community." She took a literal step forward, placing her boot directly on the blade of my steel shovel, pinning it to the ice. "If I hear one more scrape, just one single percussive impact against this concrete, I am calling the police, and I am personally writing you a $200 HOA citation for non-compliant property maintenance noise. Do you understand me? No. More. Scraping." I looked down at her boot on my shovel. Then I looked up at her squinting, triumphant eyes. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully used the weight of municipal bureaucracy to make me freeze my assets off while my driveway turned into a permanent ice rink. A slow, deeply toxic smile began to form underneath my mustache. The anger evaporated, replaced by a beautiful, crystal-clear vision of absolute malice. "You know what, Brenda? You are absolutely right," I said, my voice dropping into a tone of pure, unadulterated compliance. "I apologize. The law is the law, and far be it from me to violate Chapter 11. No more scraping. I promise you from this exact moment forward, I will find a whisper-quiet, non-percussive alternative to clear my driveway. You won't hear a single scrape from this shovel again." She blinked, clearly caught off guard by how quickly I folded. She sniffed loudly, pulled her robe tighter around her, and gave a sharp, satisfied nod. "Good. See that you do? Some of us value our repose." She turned on her heel and stomped back to her house, completely unaware that she had just opened a portal to a very specific, highly legal hell. I walked back into my garage, tossed the metal shovel onto a pile of cardboard boxes, and immediately closed the garage door. I stripped off my heavy coat and sat down at my workbench, my laptop glowing in the dim light. Brenda wanted to play the ordnance game? Fine. Let's look at the actual playing field. I opened up the official digital portal for the Fargo Municipal Code and scrolled straight to Chapter 11. I didn't just read Section 3. I read the entire thing, including the footnotes, the amendments from 1994, and the specific definitions section that most people skip because it's incredibly boring. But to me, it was poetry. Brenda was right about one thing. Intermittent percussive sounds, like a shovel striking concrete, were heavily restricted before 7 a.m. The code specifically banned sounds that had a peak decibel level over a certain limit if they occurred in short, sharp bursts. Why? Because those are the sounds that wake people up out of a sound sleep. But as I kept scrolling, my eyes landed on Section 11-0305, Continuous Mechanical and Environmental Ventilation Sounds. According to the City of Fargo, a continuous sound, defined as a noise that operates without significant interruption for a period of more than 3 minutes, was governed by an entirely different set of rules. For a residential zone, a continuous mechanical sound was completely legal at any hour of the day or night, provided that the noise level did not exceed 60 decibels when measured from the property line of the complaining party. I let out a low whistle. 60 decibels. To put that in perspective, a normal conversation is about 60 decibels. A background hum of a refrigerator is about 40. I grabbed my phone, opened an online decibel chart, and started comparing items. A lawn mower? Too loud, around 90 decibels. A snowblower? Way too loud, hovering around 85. Plus it counts as an engine-driven tool, which had its own time restrictions under the HOA bylaws. Then my eyes hit a very specific entry on a consumer appliance safety chart. Handheld hairdryers. A standard consumer hairdryer operates at a frequency that produces roughly 55 to 58 decibels of continuous, non-percussive air movement when measured from a distance of 10 feet. It has no impact noise. It doesn't scrape. It doesn't thud. It is a steady, unchanging, aerodynamic hum. And more importantly, it produces heat. Hot air melts ice. It takes a really, really long time, sure, but physics is physics. If I used a hairdryer to clear my driveway, I wouldn't be breaking a single city noise ordinance. I wouldn't be violating the HOA's rule against heavy machinery or motorized lawn equipment. I would simply be operating a standard household personal care appliance on my own property. But doing this in a North Dakota winter wasn't as simple as just running an indoor extension cord out the window. If I plugged a 1,875-watt heating appliance into a standard outdoor outlet during a sub-zero freeze, I was going to trip the breaker within 4 minutes, or worse, cause an electrical arc that would fry my home's panel. I needed power. Serious, stable, code-compliant power. The next morning, I called Mike. Mike was a licensed master electrician who had done some commercial work for my business before. He was a no-nonsense guy with a graying beard, a massive tool belt, and a permanent expression of mild annoyance at the world. When his white van pulled into my driveway, I met him at the garage door. "What's the emergency, Kevin?" Mike asked, wiping his boots on the mat. "You said on the phone you needed a dedicated circuit put in, like yesterday. You getting a hot tub or something?" "Not exactly, Mike," I said, gesturing for him to follow me to the electrical panel in the back of the garage. "I need a dedicated, isolated 20-amp circuit run from this main panel, through the exterior wall, terminating in a heavy-duty weather-sealed GFCI outlet box right next to the driveway." Mike looked at the panel, then looked out the window at the snow. "Okay, that's not a huge job. A bit of a pain with the frost on the exterior wall, but doable. What are you running off it? A commercial engine block heater? A heavy-duty welder? A Revlon 1,875-watt ionic ceramic hairdryer?" I said flatly. Mike stopped looking at the panel. He slowly turned his head to look at me, his face completely blank. "Come again?" "You heard me, Mike. I need to run a hairdryer. Outside, in the freezing cold, for a very, very long time." Mike stared at me for a solid 10 seconds, probably trying to calculate if he needed to call a mental health crisis line. "Kevin, are you grooming a frozen horse out there? What are we doing here, man?" "I'm melting my driveway, Mike," I explained, leaning against the workbench. "My neighbor Brenda decided that snow shoveling is a criminal offense because of the scraping sound. She quoted the municipal code at me. So I checked the code. A hairdryer runs below the 60 decibel limit for continuous mechanical noise. It's legally bulletproof. But to melt an entire driveway with a hairdryer, I need it to run continuously for hours without dropping voltage or blowing a fuse. I need a dedicated line that can handle maximum amp draw under continuous thermal load in sub-zero temperatures." A slow transformation came over Mike's face. The confusion faded, his eyes widened slightly, and then this massive, toothy grin broke through his gray beard. He let out a loud, booming laugh that echoed in the garage. "You have got to be kidding me. You're going to blow-dry your driveway just to piss off the HOA lady?" "I'm not doing it to piss her off, Mike. I'm doing it to comply with her wishes. She asked for a quiet, non-percussive alternative. I am merely being an exceptionally considerate neighbor." "Man, this is the most beautiful piece of absolute sickness I have ever heard in my 20 years in the trade," Mike said, slapping his clipboard against his leg. "All right, listen. If you want to do this right, we can't just use standard residential junk. If you run an 1,875-watt load continuously, that heater element is going to pull roughly 15.6 amps. On a standard 15-amp home circuit, that wire is going to get hot, the voltage will drop, and the breaker will pop within 20 minutes. We need a full 20-amp commercial-grade breaker. We're going to run thick, 12-gauge, solid copper wire, not that flimsy 14-gauge stuff. And for the outside, we need a weatherproof while-in-use cover, a bubble cover, so even if it's snowing sideways, no moisture can get into the receptacle." "Can you do it today?" I asked. "Brother, I will cancel my next 3 appointments just to watch the start of this," Mike said, already reaching for his drill. "But what about the cord? A standard indoor extension cord will crack like glass in this cold, and it'll restrict the current, which kills your heat output. I already took care of that, I said, pointing to a large cardboard box on the floor. I ordered a 100-foot, 10-gauge, heavy-duty industrial extension cord rated for -40 degrees. It's thick enough to power a small village. Perfect, Mike muttered, already measuring out the conduit. Now, what about the dryer itself? Those cheap little plastic things have a thermal cutoff switch inside. If the internal temperature gets too hot because the cold air restricts the intake flow, it'll shut itself down after an hour. I bought 3 of them, I smiled. And I spent the morning modifying a custom weather-sealed housing unit out of an old plastic toolbox. I drilled an intake hole lined with a high-flow mesh filter to keep the snow out, and an output nozzle lined with heat-resistant silicone tape. The dryer stays bone-dry and protected from the wind, while the hot air gets channeled directly through a rigid aluminum duct pipe. Mike stopped drilling for a second, looking at me with a mixture of professional respect and genuine fear. You are a dangerous man, Kevin. A highly organized, dangerous man. For the next 3 hours, the garage was a whirlwind of activity. Mike worked like a man possessed, drilling through the rim joist, running the heavy 12-gauge wire through protective EMT conduit, and mounting a heavy-duty industrial steel box to the exterior brick facade of my house. He wired in a top-of-the-line commercial GFCI receptacle that could detect even the slightest hint of a moisture short and cut the power in milliseconds for safety. While he was doing that, I was assembling the weapon. I took the Revlon hairdryer, fitted it securely inside the modified plastic toolbox, and clamped the aluminum duct pipe to the nose. I plugged it into the massive 10-gauge yellow extension cord, testing the fit. It was a masterpiece of ridiculous engineering. By 3 in the afternoon, Mike was wrapping things up. He flipped the new 20-amp breaker in my main panel, and the little green light on the outdoor GFCI outlet flicked on, glowing like a beacon of malicious compliance. "All right, she's live," Mike said, packing up his tools. "That line can handle a continuous 16-amp draw until the sun explodes. Total cost for emergency installation, commercial materials, and the custom outdoor box comes out to $450. And honestly, it's worth every penny. Please tell me you're going to film this." "Oh, I don't need to film it, Mike," I said, handing him his check. "The whole neighborhood is going to have a front row seat." The weather forecast for that night was exactly what I had been praying for. A massive Canadian clipper system moving through, dropping 3 inches of fresh, light powder followed by a hard freeze that would turn any uncleared surface into a sheet of solid glass. Perfect conditions for some high-level residential maintenance. I woke up at 4:30 a.m. the next morning. I looked out the window, and sure enough, the world was blanketed in a fresh, pristine layer of white snow over a base of slick ice. It was absolutely freezing out, easily 0 degrees with a wind chill that would bite through denim. I dressed in my full winter gear, walked down to the garage, and prepared the rig. I hauled the custom plastic toolbox housing the hairdryer out to the top of the driveway. I uncoiled the massive yellow 10-gauge extension cord, plugging one end into the heavy-duty outdoor box Mike had installed and the other into the hairdryer inside its protective case. At exactly 5 a.m., I took my position. I sat down in a sturdy aluminum camping chair right at the top of my driveway, bundled up like an astronaut, holding the rigid aluminum duct pipe extension like a high-tech bazooka. I flipped the switch on the extension cord's built-in power strip. Inside the box, the Revlon 1875-watt ionic ceramic hair dryer instantly roared to life. Whirr! It wasn't a loud sound. It wasn't the violent, ground-shaking roar of a snowblower or the sharp, echoing clang of a metal shovel hitting concrete. It was a smooth, high-pitched, incredibly steady aerodynamic whine. A continuous mechanical drone that cut through the silence of the early morning. I pointed the aluminum nozzle at the snowbank, right at the property line, exactly 3 inches from Brenda's pristine, untouched yard. A jet of scorching 130-degree air shot out of the nozzle. Within seconds, the snow directly underneath it didn't just melt, it vanished, turning instantly into a puff of steam and a tiny trickle of water that immediately froze upon hitting the cold air further down. It was working. It was also incredibly, hilariously slow. To clear 1 square foot of snow and ice, I had to hold the nozzle completely still for roughly 4 minutes. I checked my phone. 5:15 a.m. I had about 20,000 square inches of driveway to go. I settled into my camping chair, took a sip of hot coffee from my thermos, and adjusted my grip on the aluminum pipe. The hum was hypnotic. Whirr. Around 6 a.m., the first sign of life appeared next door. The slats of Brenda's Venetian blinds clicked open. I didn't turn my head, but out of the corner of my eye, I could see her silhouette, standing at the window. She stayed there for a full 10 minutes, staring through the dark at the bizarre spectacle unfolding on my driveway. A grown man sitting in a lawn chair in the middle of a blizzard, holding a shiny metal pipe to the ground, while a low, constant drone filled the air. At 6:15 a.m., the front door flew open. Brenda didn't even bother with the bathrobe this time. She had thrown her heavy winter coat over her pajamas, her boots untied, and flapping in the snow as she marched furiously across her lawn. "What are you doing?" she screamed, her voice barely carrying over the steady whine of the hairdryer. "What is that awful noise? Are you out of your mind?" I didn't move the pipe. I didn't look up. I just tapped the side of my heavy winter hat, where I had conspicuously placed a massive pair of neon green, industrial-grade, noise-canceling headphones over my ears. I gave her a cheerful, exaggerated wave with my free hand and went right back to staring at the tiny circle of melting ice. "Kevin, turn that machine off!" she yelled, stepping closer, her face contorting with rage. She reached down, clearly intending to grab the aluminum pipe out of my hand. "I wouldn't touch that if I were you, Brenda," I shouted over the hum, finally looking up. "This is a highly pressurized thermal extraction unit. It gets extremely hot. If you touch the aluminum shell, you will get a second-degree burn, and my homeowner's insurance will absolutely sue you for interfering with authorized property maintenance." She pulled her hand back as if she'd been bitten, her eyes darting to the plastic toolbox on the ground where the whir was originating. "You are making an intentional mockery of this neighborhood. That sound is driving me insane. It's been going on for over an hour. Turn it off, or I am calling the police right now." "Go ahead, Brenda," I yelled back, giving her a thumbs up. "I am completely within my rights. No scraping. You asked for a quiet, non-percussive alternative, and I found one. Have a blessed day." She let out a high-pitched sound of pure frustration, turned around, and practically ran back into her house, her phone already clutched in her hand. I chuckled, took another sip of coffee, and moved the nozzle exactly 2 inches to the left. The continuous mechanical drone rolled on. Whirr! By 11 a.m., I had been sitting in that chair for 6 straight hours. My toes were completely numb, my fingers felt like frozen sausages, and I had successfully cleared an area of my driveway roughly the size of a twin mattress. But I didn't care. I was a man on a mission of pure legal spite. The custom housing unit was holding up perfectly. Mike's 20-amp circuit hadn't flickered once, and the heavy 10-gauge cord was lying in the snow, cold to the touch, but delivering flawless, uninhibited voltage to my little Revlon engine of destruction. Neighbors were starting to drive by on their way to lunch or errands. Every single car slowed down to a crawl as they passed my house. Ted, who lived across the street, actually rolled down his window, stared at me holding a hairdryer duct to a patch of ice for a solid 30 seconds, and just shook his head in silent, reverent awe before driving away. Then, right on cue, the long arm of the law arrived. A sleek, black-and-white Fargo police cruiser rolled slowly into the cul-de-sac, its tires crunching on the packed snow. It pulled up right to the curb of my driveway. The driver's side door opened, and Officer Reynolds stepped out. I knew Reynolds. He was a veteran cop who had handled a few minor traffic things in the area. A big guy with a tired expression that suggested he had seen everything the city had to offer and was thoroughly unimpressed by all of it. At the exact same moment, Brenda's front door slammed open. She practically flew down her steps, pointing a dramatic finger at me like she was accusing a witch in Salem. "Officer, thank goodness you're here!" she shouted, her voice trembling with theatrical distress. "He's been doing this since 5 o'clock this morning. It's psychological warfare. He's operating illegal, unmuffled machinery to harass me. I want him arrested. I want that contraption confiscated." Officer Reynolds didn't say anything to her. He walked slowly up my driveway, his heavy boots leaving deep prints in the snow I hadn't cleared yet. He stopped about 5 feet away from me, resting his hands on his utility belt, and just stared down at the aluminum pipe, then at the plastic toolbox, and finally at my face. I flipped the power strip switch, and for the first time in 6 hours, the hairdryer whirred down to a silence that felt heavy and sudden. I pulled down my noise-canceling headphones and smiled. "Morning, officer. Cold one out today, huh?" Reynolds let out a long breath, a small cloud of white vapor escaping his lips. "Sir, your neighbor here says you're operating an illegal industrial device and creating a public nuisance. Care to tell me what's going on?" "I'm styling my driveway, officer," I said with complete sincerity. "It gets incredibly frizzy when the North Dakota humidity hits the snow. Just trying to keep the property looking sharp." Brenda let out a screech. "See? He's mocking you. He's crazy. He's been sitting out. Here in a blizzard for 6 hours holding a tube! It's a public safety hazard." "Officer," I said, my tone immediately shifting into the calm, measured cadence of a man who knows he's holding all the cards. "I am engaged in standard residential snow and ice management. Yesterday morning, Ms. Brenda informed me that the use of a metal snow shovel was a violation of Fargo Municipal Code, Chapter 11, specifically regarding intermittent percussive impact sounds before 7. Being a law-abiding citizen, I immediately ceased all scraping and impact activities. Reynolds looked at Brenda, then back at me. "Okay, so what is that?" He pointed a gloved finger at the toolbox. "This is a standard consumer-grade personal care appliance, a hairdryer, secured within a protective weather-sealed casing to ensure full compliance with the National Electrical Code for temporary outdoor use. As you can hear, or rather, as you could hear, it produces a continuous, non-percussive mechanical hum. Under Chapter 11, Section 11-0305, continuous mechanical sounds in a residential zone are fully permitted 24 hours a day, provided they do not exceed 60 decibels when measured from the property line of the complaining party." Reynolds blinked. He looked down at the clipboard he was carrying, then back at me. "You looked up the decibel limits for continuous noise?" "Of course," I said, reaching into the breast pocket of my parka and pulling out a neatly folded, sealed plastic Ziploc bag containing a printed copy of the Fargo Municipal Code, a copy of the manufacturer's technical specifications for the hairdryer, and a calibrated, certified digital decibel meter I had borrowed from a sound engineer buddy of mine the night before. I handed the bag to the officer. And if you look at this digital meter right here, which has been running a continuous logging cycle since 5 a.m. from the exact boundary of my property line, I pointed to a small tripodic setup I had placed near Brenda's yard. You will see that the peak ambient noise level generated by my appliance at her property line is exactly 58.2 decibels. That is a full 1.8 decibels below the maximum legal threshold allowed by the City of Fargo for continuous daytime and nighttime mechanical operations. Officer Reynolds took the Ziploc bag. He opened it, pulled out the digital meter, and looked at the glowing screen. He scrolled through the logged data with his thumb, his face completely unreadable. Brenda was practically vibrating with anticipation next to him. "Well, officer, arrest him. He just admitted he's been doing it for 6 hours. Write him the ticket," she demanded. Reynolds slowly lowered the decibel meter. He turned around to face Brenda, his expression deadpan. "Ma'am, there's nothing to write a ticket for." "What?" Brenda gaped, her mouth opening so wide I thought her jaw might unhinge. "Are you blind? Are you deaf? That noise is horrible." "According to the city code, it's legally quiet," Reynolds explained, his voice flat and professional. "He's using a standard household appliance. It's below the 60 decibel limit. He isn't scraping, he isn't hitting anything, and he isn't using an engine-driven tool like a chainsaw or a commercial snowblower, which would have time restrictions under city law. He's essentially running a very small fan. It's completely legal." "But it's a hairdryer!" she yelled, her voice cracking. "He's melting snow with a hairdryer. That's not normal." "There is no law in the state of North Dakota that dictates the specific thermodynamic method a homeowner must use to clear ice from their private property," I chimed in helpfully from my camping chair. Officer Reynolds gave me a look that was about 90% annoyance and 10% hidden amusement. He turned back to Brenda. "Ma'am, he's right. There's no violation here. Furthermore, this is the 3rd time this week you've called the non-emergency line for a civil neighbor dispute that doesn't involve a criminal offense. If you call emergency services out here again because a resident is using a personal care product on their own driveway, I am going to personally cite you for the misuse of a public service communication system. Do you understand?" Brenda looked like she had just been slapped with a wet fish. She opened her mouth to argue, saw the stern, completely done with her nonsense look on Reynolds' face, and choked back her words. She let out a sharp, furious gasp, turned around, and marched back up her driveway, slamming her front door so hard that a pile of snow fell off her gutter and landed right on her head. Reynolds watched her go, then turned back to me. He handed me my plastic bag of documents. "You're a real piece of work, you know that, Kevin?" "I'm just a guy who loves compliance, officer," I said, flashing him a grin. "Just make sure that cord doesn't trip anyone on the public sidewalk," he said, turning back toward his cruiser. "And for God's sake, buy a heat gun. It'll go faster." "Where's the fun in that?" I called out. As soon as the police cruiser pulled out of the cul-de-sac, I flipped the power strip back on. The Revlon roared back to life with its beautiful, steady whir. I sat back down, took another sip of coffee, and settled in for the long haul. I stayed in that chair for 14 hours straight. By 7 o'clock that evening, the sun had long since set, the stars were out, and the temperature had dropped into the negative double digits. My driveway was a bizarre, surreal landscape. A single, perfectly dry, bone-clean strip of concrete exactly 24 inches wide, running from my garage to the street, flanked on both sides by mountains of untouched snow and solid ice. It looked like a runway in the middle of the Arctic. My body was entirely frozen, but my soul was on fire. I finally flipped the switch to off, letting the hairdryer cool down inside its housing before unplugging the massive yellow cord. I hauled the gear back into the garage, feeling like a conquering hero. But the battle wasn't over. Brenda wasn't the type to take a police-mandated defeat lying down. She had one final, desperate card to play: the Homeowners Association. 2 days later, I checked my mail and found a bright pink laminated envelope. Inside was an official citation from the Autumn Ridge HOA Board of Directors, signed by Vice President Brenda. It was a $500 fine for the unauthorized deployment and long-term storage of non-standard commercial maintenance equipment in public view, creating a visual blight and structural hazard. The notice informed me that I had 48 hours to pay the fine or face a property lien, and that I was required to attend the monthly HOA hearing the following Tuesday to defend my actions. I stared at the pink slip. $500. A visual blight. I smiled so hard my face hurt. She had walked right into the trap. The Tuesday night HOA meeting was held in the basement conference room of the local community center. The room smelled of stale coffee, cheap linoleum, and the crushed dreams of suburban residents. There were about 15 people in attendance, mostly older folks who had nothing better to do than complain about grass height and trash can placement. At the front of the room sat the 3-member executive board. In the center was the president, an older guy named Arthur, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on Earth. To his right sat Brenda, looking smug, prim, and wearing a tailored blazer that screamed, "I have managerial authority." When my name was called, I stood up and walked down to the podium at the front of the room. I was carrying a thick manila folder under my arm. "All right, item number 4 on the agenda," Arthur sighed, looking at his notes. "Kevin from Lot 42. Appeal of a $500 citation for non-standard equipment deployment. Brenda, since you issued the fine, why don't you give us the overview?" Brenda stood up, leaning her hands on the table, her eyes locking onto me with a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. "Thank you, Mr. President. For the past week, the resident at Lot 42 has engaged in an ongoing, disruptive spectacle. He has constructed an unauthorized, dangerous mechanical device using industrial wiring and a commercial-grade extension cord left exposed across his property for over 14 hours. He used this device to melt snow in a manner that constitutes a visual blight to the neighborhood, a tripping hazard, and a direct violation of our bylaws regarding the use of non-approved property maintenance machinery. The fine is fully justified under Section 9 of the HOA Charter." Arthur nodded slowly, looking tired. He turned to me. "Kevin, what do you have to say for yourself? You can't just be building mad scientist rigs on your driveway, man. It disrupts the aesthetic." I adjusted my posture at the podium, opened my manila folder, and laid out 3 copies of my documentation, sliding them across the table to the board members. "Thank you, Arthur," I said, keeping my voice calm, professional, and entirely devoid of emotion. "I'd like to direct the board's attention to Exhibit A, the official invoice from Mike's Master Electrical Services, along with the approved and signed building permit from the City of Fargo. As you can see, the industrial wiring Ms. Brenda is referring to is a fully permitted, code-compliant, dedicated 20-amp exterior GFCI circuit. It is permanent home infrastructure, fully approved by the city inspector. It cannot be classified as an unauthorized deployment." Brenda scoffed. "That's the outlet. What about the machine? The toolbox with the aluminum duct pipe? That is clearly non-standard maintenance equipment." "Let's look at Exhibit B," I continued smoothly, gesturing to the next page in their packets. "This is the official text of the Autumn Ridge HOA bylaws, Section 9, Paragraph 2, which governs snow and ice removal equipment. The Charter explicitly defines authorized equipment as, and I quote, plows, snow blowers, mechanical shovels, and manual scraping implements. The bylaws state that any equipment falling under this definition must be stored out of public view when not in active use." "Exactly," Brenda crowed, looking around the room for support. "It was in public view for 14 hours. It's non-standard." "But that's the loophole, Brenda," I said, dropping my voice into a low, predatory purr. "The bylaws only govern items that fall under the definition of snow and ice removal equipment. Now, let's look at Exhibit C, the official product classification from the Consumer Product Safety Commission and the manufacturer's technical user manual for the Revlon 1875 watt appliance." I pointed to the highlighted text on the page. "The manufacturer explicitly classifies this device as a personal care and hair styling appliance. It is designed, marketed, and legally certified for the purpose of personal grooming and hair care." The room went dead silent. Arthur blinked, looking at the manufacturer's sheet. "Kevin, are you telling me you used a hairdryer?" "Yes, Arthur, a standard off-the-shelf hairdryer. Under both federal consumer law and local retail classification, a hairdryer is a personal grooming tool. It is not, by any stretch of legal or linguistic definition, snow removal equipment. Because the HOA bylaws contain a strict, closed definition of what constitutes maintenance equipment, and because a personal care appliance is completely absent from that definition, the HOA has absolutely zero jurisdiction over how, where, or for how long I operate a hairdryer on my private property. You cannot fine a resident for using a personal grooming product outdoors." Brenda's face went from smug satisfaction to a shade of ghostly white. That's absurd. You can't just blow-dry a driveway and call it personal grooming." "I am a man who values a perfectly styled piece of concrete, Brenda," I countered, looking directly at her. "Furthermore, under the National Electrical Code guidelines for temporary outdoor thermal units, the setup was entirely safe and fully permitted. If the HOA attempts to enforce a fine on a non-regulated personal care item, it would constitute an arbitrary and capricious enforcement of the bylaws, which, as our legal counsel knows, would immediately invalidate the entire section of the Charter and open the board up to a massive civil lawsuit for harassment." Arthur stared at the paperwork. He looked at the city permit. He looked at the manufacturer's manual. Then he looked over at Brenda, his eyebrows furrowing in deep irritation. "Brenda, did you seriously try to fine a guy $500 for using a Revlon blow-dryer?" "It was loud. It was a nuisance. He did it for 14 hours, she stammered, her voice reaching a desperate, high-pitched octave. "We already have a police report from Officer Reynolds," I added, sliding the final piece of paper forward, "which confirms the noise level was completely within municipal limits for continuous household appliances. The city says it's legal. The federal government says it's a hairdryer. The HOA says you can't regulate it." Arthur slammed his hand down on the table, letting out a long, exhausted laugh. "Motion to dismiss the citation against Lot 42, due to lack of jurisdictional definitions and full municipal compliance." "Seconded," the third board member said, hiding his face behind his hands to conceal his laughter. Motion carries. The fine is voided, Arthur said, rubbing his temples. He turned a hard look toward Brenda. Brenda, we've discussed this. You can't keep using the HOA to fight personal wars with people who outsmart you. It's a bad look for the board. Brenda sat there, completely frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The sheer humiliation of being undone by a hairdryer manual in front of the entire neighborhood association was too much for her ego to bear. She slowly stood up, gathered her neatly organized folders, shoved them into her bag with shaking hands, and walked straight out of the room without saying a single word. 2 days later, a neighborhood-wide email went out announcing her official resignation from the HOA board due to personal reasons. When I got home that night, the temperature had dropped again, and a light flurry of snow was starting to fall, dusting my perfectly clear, dry 24-inch runway of concrete. I walked into the garage, looked at the custom plastic toolbox resting on my workbench, and felt a deep, profound sense of peace. I opened up my phone, pulled up my favorite shopping app, and looked at my cart. I didn't buy a heat gun. Instead, I scrolled through the hair care accessories section and found exactly what I was looking for: a professional, extra-wide, high-flow diffuser attachment designed to evenly distribute heat over large surface areas. I clicked Buy Now with a big, satisfied smile. Winter was far from over in Fargo, and my driveway was going to have the most voluminous, frizz-free finish in the entire state. The following morning, the Fargo Weather Channel was predicting what the local meteorologist joyfully called the Alberta Clippers' Revenge. Another 4 inches of heavy, wet snow, followed by a flash freeze that would solidify the whole mess into an Arctic skating rink. I stood at my kitchen window, sipping coffee, watching the first heavy flakes begin to drift down onto my driveway. Next door, Brenda's house was completely dark, the blinds drawn shut like a fortress under siege. She might have resigned from the HOA board, but a woman with that much concentrated spite doesn't just disappear. She bides her time. I knew she was waiting for me to slip up, to let one single percussive scrape echo through the neighborhood so she could call the city inspectors. Not today, Brenda, I muttered to myself, putting my mug down. I went down to the garage and unboxed my latest Amazon delivery, a commercial-grade, extra-large ionic diffuser attachment. Normally, this thing is used in high-end salons to dry curly hair without causing frizz, but when snapped onto the end of my rigid aluminum duct pipe, it acted as a perfect wide-angle thermal distribution manifold. Instead of melting a tiny 2-inch circle, I was about to blast a glorious 12-inch swath of hot, continuous air. I hauled the plastic toolbox housing out to the driveway, plugged into Mike's legendary permitted 20-amp circuit, and settled back into my aluminum camping chair. I threw on my neon green noise-canceling headphones, flipped the power strip, and the familiar, beautiful hum filled the cul-de-sac. Whirr. By noon, my new diffuser setup was absolutely tearing through the snow. I was clearing a path twice as wide in half the time, leaving a bone-dry trail of concrete in my wake. The continuous mechanical drone was a steady, unchanging 58 decibels. Completely legal, completely unassailable. Around 1 p.m., a massive, rusted flatbed commercial truck rumbled into the cul-de-sac, its air brakes screeching to a halt right in front of Brenda's house. On the back of the flatbed was a massive industrial diesel-powered thermal melting unit, the kind of heavy machinery commercial airports use to clear runways. Out of the truck stepped a guy wearing a high-vis jacket, a hard hat, and a tool belt that looked like it weighed 50 pounds. He walked up Brenda's driveway, met her at the front door, and began looking over a clipboard while Brenda pointed aggressively at my house. I flipped my power strip off, the hairdryer whirring down to a silence. I pulled down my headphones and walked to the edge of my property line. "Yo, Chief!" the contractor yelled over to me, scratching his beard as he walked down the driveway. "You the guy running the hairdryer rig?" "That's me," I said. "I'm Kevin. Who are you?" "I'm Dave, with Blizzard Force Thermal Solutions," he said, looking at my plastic toolbox and the aluminum pipe with a mixture of profound confusion and genuine respect. "Your neighbor next door just called our emergency dispatch line. Paid a $3,000 cash retainer to have us bring out our industrial diesel melting unit to clear her driveway. She told us she needed it done immediately because she was being subjected to illegal competitive thermal harassment by a madman with a salon appliance." I let out a loud laugh. "She's paying $3,000 for a commercial runway melter?" "Yeah," Dave said, shaking his head. "But here's the kicker. I just took a look at her property lines and our equipment specs. That diesel unit pulls 95 decibels at 20 feet, and under Fargo City Ordinance, I can't operate a commercial-grade combustion heater within 50 feet of a residential structure without a special variance permit from the City Council. If I turn that truck on, the city will fine my company $10,000 and pull our license." "And let me guess," I smiled. "Brenda didn't get a variance permit." "Brenda didn't even know what a variance permit was," Dave chuckled, pulling a laminated pink cancellation slip from his clipboard. "She thought because she was paying private contractor rates, the city laws didn't apply to her. I just told her we can't unload the rig, and she's furious. She's inside trying to call our corporate office right now." "Well, Dave," I said, gesturing to my perfectly dry, code-compliant runway of concrete. "If you want to see how to melt ice legally in this town, you're looking at it. 58 decibels, fully permitted, completely continuous." Dave stared at my rig, then at the tiny, perfect line of dry concrete, and finally back at his massive, useless $3,000 diesel truck. He let out a low whistle, slapping his clipboard against his thigh. "Kevin, I've been in the commercial snow removal business for 15 years, Dave said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "And this is, without a doubt, the most beautifully petty piece of malicious compliance I have ever seen in my entire life. You literally broke her brain with a Revlon blowout." "I just value a quiet neighborhood, Dave," I said, walking back to my camping chair. "Keep styling that driveway, brother," Dave laughed, walking back to his flatbed. "You're an absolute legend." As the massive commercial truck rumbled out of the cul-de-sac, leaving Brenda's driveway covered in an untouched, rapidly freezing sheet of ice, I settled back into my chair. I adjusted my neon green headphones, gripped my aluminum duct pipe, and flipped the switch. The hairdryer roared back to life. Whirr! I looked over at Brenda's window, just in time to see the blinds snap shut one final time. My driveway was flawless, the law was on my side, and the sweet sound of absolute compliance echoed beautifully into the North Dakota freeze.